Hello, everybody. We're so happy to have you with us today. My name is Rosemary Heileman, and I'm a member of the Woods and Wetlands group of the Illinois chapter of the Sierra Club. And we cover an area in Northeast Illinois, covering much of Lake County and parts of Northwest Cook County. So we're happy to have you here today with our guest, Doug Ower. And we are going to be recording this presentation and we will take questions later in the chat. So welcome. Uh, Doug, we're happy to have you with us. This is another in our series of speaker programs sponsored by the Woods and Wetlands Group of the Sierra Club. Our speaker series programs feature lectures on topics relating to our environment, stewardship, wildlife, nature, public policy, and anything about outdoor activities like hiking and canoeing, bird watching, you name it. Doug Ower is the chairman of our Woods and Wetlands group, but he also has an extremely well-rounded background in the issues surrounding nuclear energy and facilities. Let's see, I'm reading that. Okay, if you'd please mute yourself so that you don't interrupt the program with a barking dog or other commotion. And we will use the chat at the end to see if you have any questions. So feel free to put your questions in the chat as we go along. All right. And then let's move on to the speaker. Doug is the chair of the Sierra Club's Woods and Wetlands Group in Lake County, a lifelong resident of Zion, and he lives near this former Zion nuclear power station. He has been active in advancing clean energy legislation, including the Future Energy Jobs Act and the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act here in Illinois. Doug enjoys spending time outdoors and walking in the area's forest preserves. And I know that he's also been a member of a commission in Zion having to do with the plant, and he will tell you about that. So, Doug, we are so happy to have you here today in a speaker capacity instead of a host capacity. And so, thank you for coming and thank you for speaking.
Thank you very much, Rosemary, for the intro. And I should state that, yeah, although this basically aligns with Sierra Club policy, I'm not speaking specifically for Sierra Club. So just be aware of that. And then let's see here if I can get this started. Hang on one second. Of course, it changed screens. Okay, so nuclear has been a hot topic lately, and which I'll get into as we go along through this, and I'll mention some of the reasons why. But I think my background and Zion, it ties in heavily with nuclear policy, so I will be showing some pictures of the Zion nuclear plant during decommissioning, as well as discussing Zion because it fits in with part of environmental nuclear policy. So I'm a lifelong Zion resident. I lived in Zion actually before the nuclear plant. As a kid, we used to drive along the lake to go to the state park and drove right through what became the future Zion nuclear plant. And used to say future site of an electrical power generating station, didn't say nuclear, but that's what we wound up getting. And so I lived and worked less than a mile away from the Zion nuclear plant. My workplace was actually only a few blocks away, so I spent the entire time it was operating almost living and working very close to the nuclear plant. And my father-in-law also worked in the nuclear plant. He was there during construction. He's a pipe fitter, and then he was there afterwards because there was always work to do at the plant. So I've had a lot of close ties to that. But I'll have to say, growing up, we were busy raising a family, and so I didn't probably pay as close attention to as I should have. But my youngest son got very involved in nuclear, and he introduced me and my wife to several nuclear organizations and got us quite interested in nuclear. So um, I once the power plant closed, once it closed, there was when they decided to do the decommissioning, they had something called the Zion Citizens Advisory Panel, which had absolutely no authority to make any decisions, but the decommissioning contractor would do presentations quarterly and give the members of that plant tours, and we could ask as many questions as we wanted instead of being limited to the 3 minutes that they gave visitors. So that was a very great opportunity to learn more about what was going on at the plant. Later on, I was on the San Onofre working group. They have a big problem. They're decommissioning there. They are right on the Pacific Ocean next to a military base. And that spent nuclear fuel is very close to the ocean. And they want to move it from there, but there's a lot of reasons why it can't be moved. So that's another thing I was involved with on the nuclear side. And I've also been a longtime NEIS member, which is based out of Chicago, Nuclear Energy Information Service. And so I've had various different associations with nuclear. So that's part of what I've done. So I wanted to get into everyone wants, we need nuclear to get away from coal. And that really is not, nuclear just is not a climate solution. So I want to get into some reasons why that is. It's just not practical or possible. But some of the reasons are very high construction costs, very long delays in building, major safety issues. And I am so tired of people saying it's safe. It's not. And there is no storage solution at all in the United States for spent radioactive fuel. The future is renewable power, and costs are going down, technology is improving, and battery storage, which is a vital piece of that to make renewable work, is also coming on very strong. And we'll get into that more as we go along. So here's the Zion nuclear plant. I need to change this. Okay. So it started in 1973, 74. Each reactor started separately. There's two reactors. Each one was about 1.1 gigawatts. It shut down in 1998. And then decommissioning started about 2010, went to 2023. The ZCAP commission was basically disbanded when COVID started. Most of the decommissioning was done, but there was a problem, which I'll mention later. So the site was released by the NRC. So the nuclear license was transferred back to Constellation from the contractor who held the license during the decommissioning. It was about $900 million to decommission that plant, and that's actually on the lower end of the scale. San Onofre is going to be over $4 billion to decommission. And we are left with 65 dry casts of spent radioactive nuclear fuel, and high-level nuclear waste stays on site. There's no place to send it. And so we will have that sitting on our lakefront for many decades to come. Okay, why is this not? Okay. So I was asked to describe a little bit about the nuclear cycle. There's a couple different ways of doing it, but this is what Zion was. It's a pressurized water reactor. So you'll see over there on the left side is where the nuclear rods are, or the core, and control rods to control the reaction. And basically all it does is generate heat. The whole point to nuclear is to generate lots and lots of heat. That very high pressure, very hot water is pumped to a steam generator. They're both inside the containment dome. And from the steam generator, that's converted to steam, and that feeds out to turbines. And they show one in the picture, but in reality there were two. There's like a high pressure, low pressure turbine, and then those spin an electric generator, which feeds out to the grid. On the lower end of the drawing, you have the condenser. You have to turn the steam back into water to reheat it. And here it shows a cooling tower, but in Zion, we just dumped all that extra heat into the lake. There's several things are done. One of the sites that we have in Illinois, one of the nuclear plants, they have a big lake, artificial lake they made that they use for cooling. Sometimes it goes into rivers, but the cooling tower is very common. That's what a lot of people see. So this is inside the plant during decommissioning. And you can see there's in the front is the generator, and then there's two turbines. So this is for one of the reactors. There's a high pressure, low pressure steam turbine, and then that spins to operate the generator. One of the strange things about Zion is when they shut it down, they reversed that. They turned the generator into a motor. They powered it from the grid, spun the motor to turn the turbines, and they said that was needed to stabilize the grid. I don't know what they did after that was disconnected, but they did that for a number of years after Zion closed. So this is Sierra Club's position on nuclear power. Now, this was adopted in 1974, and it opposes the licensing, construction, and operation of new nuclear reactors, pending resolution of safety problems inherent in operation, disposal of spent fuels, and possible diversion of all nuclear materials capable of use in weapons manufacture. All three of those problems still exist. And then also establishment of adequate regulatory machinery to guarantee adherence to the foregoing. And right now, there's a lot of talk about reducing nuclear regulations, which will make it even less safe. So, as I mentioned, it was adopted in 1974. It was readopted in 2024. After Three Mile Island occurred, the disaster there, Sierra Club added to that policy. So this was adopted in 1979, and just a few months after Three Mile Island occurred, which was a meltdown. And basically, the addition is that, the Sierra Club opposes any new construction, also supports a systematic reduction of our dependence on nuclear fission as a source of power, recommends a phased closure and decommissioning of operating commercial nuclear fission reactors. So when we were working on our major energy legislation in the state, FEJA, Future Energy Jobs Act, and CEJA, Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, we, state of Illinois, Sierra Club had to get waivers because in the bill was bailouts for both for nuclear plants. So it was felt that was the only way we could get us on the path to renewable power was by helping those plants to continue to operate. Unfortunately, that was kind of a necessity when half of our power is generated by nuclear power currently in Illinois. So Illinois itself has had a moratorium that was passed in 1987 um, due to this rising interest in small modular nuclear reactors. In 2023, the moratorium was listed for reactors with a nameplate rating of under 300 megawatts. Um, Almost, pretty much all the reactors we have currently operating are much larger than that. Like I mentioned, Zion would have been like 1,100 megawatts in each reactor, and that's very similar to other reactors operating in Illinois. So 300 or less is considered to be a small modular nuclear reactor, and you'll see it abbreviated as SMNRs or sometimes SMRs, small modular reactors. So that moratorium was so the portion of the moratorium was listed. Right now, there's attempts to totally eliminate the moratorium in Illinois. Senate Bill 1527 is strictly about the moratorium, would eliminate it totally. The Clean and Reliable Grid Affordability Act, everyone calls it SURGA, also has a provision in it that would end the moratorium. So if the bill passes as currently written, we would have the moratorium ended in Illinois on new nuclear of any size. There's been a big move in a lot of states to reduce in their moratoriums. Wisconsin, Kentucky, Montana, West Virginia, Connecticut have ended or modified their moratoriums, and other states are currently looking at eliminating theirs. So unfortunately, that's the current state of nuclear. So every year there's a large report that's put out. It's called the World Nuclear Industry Status Report. This year's version, which was just released, is about 600 pages. It's a very in-depth look at nuclear around the globe. There are a couple things that really stood out in this report that I just wanted to share. Last year, 565 gigawatts of solar and wind were installed, and 5.4 gigawatts of nuclear was added. So that's 100 to 1 ratio. For all this talk about nuclear, there is just no way that nuclear can go in at the rate that's needed to convert us away from fossil fuel generation and protect us from climate change. It cannot be done. You just can't build them that fast. It's not possible. So, what's really occurring is that, solar and wind is growing rapidly, and storage, which is a critical component to that, is also rapidly increasing with decreasing costs. So, what they're noting in this report, which I think is totally true, is that you know solar in particular, and even the turbines, wind turbines, are something that you can continually improve with technology. I mean, solar collectors keep going up in capacity, in efficiency. There's a lot that can be done, just like you see with all the household electronics and TVs and computers and everything else. There's always this massive improvement in technology. The same thing goes with solar collection um, and as well as batteries. And as more and more batteries go in, there's going to be more and more different ways of using those batteries. They noted that in 2024, battery storage costs dropped by 40%. So their general conclusion about what was occurring in 2024 is a huge boost in solar and battery capacity expansion, driven by continuous significant cost decline. That does not happen in nuclear. As energy markets are evolving, there's no signs of vigorous nuclear construction, and the slow decline of nuclear power's role in electricity generation continues. Nuclear just is not a viable mechanism for powering us in light of climate change. It has to be renewable with battery storage. Here's a few examples of what kind of costs and delays have occurred recently. And on the right side, you'll see the the demolition of Zion containment domes. They had to go from the bottom up. They couldn't use explosives. So you'll see one of the containment domes was a little bit ahead of the other one. So the last nuclear reactors to go online in the United States is Vogtle. There's two of them. One went online last year and one the year before. Each one's 1.1 gigawatts, which is similar to the Zion size. Cost $36 billion for the two reactors. 36 billion. Original estimate was 14 billion. Came on 7 years late, took a total of 15 years to build. Ratepayers have had significant price increases due to this huge cost, and they had to pay it even before the construction was completed. France, another major nuclear generator, recently brought a new reactor online. Their fleet's getting older, just like United States. It was a 1.6 gigawatt reactor, cost 13.7 billion, so more than 4 times the original estimate, and was 12 years late, took a total of 17 years to build, so that's 3 or 4 times the length of time expected to build. Um, there were another place was started, VC Summer, reactors 2 and 3. The original cost was supposed to be 9.8 billion. Costs ballooned to 25 billion. It was canceled in 2017 after long delays and rising costs. So a total $9 billion had been spent when it was canceled. But because of some of the money that's rolling around through IRA and other sources, they're looking at restarting the construction. There's one in China, Shideo Bay, was triple the budget and triple the time to build. Although China has gotten others online a little bit better than this particular plant. This graph or chart gives an indication of what it looks like building nuclear. So these are startups between 2022 and 2024. So on the left side where the blue, that was the expected time frame, and then the orange was the additional, the delays. So if you look down at the bottom, you'll see Vogtle 3 and 4 that we just talked about. You can see the delays that were incurred at those plants. And then you can see France up there roughly in the middle, long delays there. There was a reactor in Slovakia. They worked on it for 6.5 years, stopped construction, paused it, and then came back and finished it. Took 38 years to build. South Korea, you can see extended lead times. Finland, extended lead times. India, I mean, China has probably done the best. They've got a few reactors on. But this is only a handful of reactors. It's not close to the amount of power that's happening with renewable power. So the latest hot item are the small modular nuclear reactors. There's been a lot of interest in it. As I mentioned in Illinois, they dropped the moratorium on them. There's a lot of money available through the IRA and DOE and other sources. The data centers, places like Microsoft and companies like that are very interested in nuclear, which is beyond me why they'd want to use it, because it's going to be their most expensive way to get electricity. But some of them are cracking deals to to power their data centers with nuclear. So there's been a lot of interest in it. There's a lot of different designs, a lot of different technologies involved. So there's a lot occurring in terms of coming up with designs, but most of them haven't gotten very far. In the United States, there's only um, one that's approved, 77 megawatts. That's all. So what the idea with small modular nuclear reactors is you would use multiple reactors and come up with something, in the total size of 500 megawatts or 1,000 megawatts. But it would take multiple reactors to do it. Theoretically, if you build the reactors in a factory, it might be a little more efficient by building multiple reactors on one production line. But the quantities we're talking about are so low, there are not going to be big changes in efficiency. I mean, solar collectors are being made by the millions. These will be by the tens, maybe. So it just can't compete. There's not going to be big, huge cost reductions by doing this. And as you'll see, it's more expensive than the large reactors anyways. So far, there's been a lot of cost overruns and a lot of delays. Everything is behind schedule on this. NuScale, the one that has one reactor approved, they had a big project that was canceled. And I think a couple of years ago, it was going to be in Idaho, and because of costs that were just escalating, it got canceled. The other thing, these smaller reactors will generate more waste. They're not, they're just, it takes a different process to get the energy output in the smaller designs. It's just going to have more waste than we get with the larger reactors. The larger reactors, even though they're still expensive and they're still to build and expensive to run, and on the nuclear side, that is the most efficient way to do it. Some of the designs use a higher uranium content. Um, which gets it closer to requirements for nuclear weapons. So that raises some additional risks. It's not at that level, but it's closer than it would be with the larger reactors. So the small modular nuclear reactors have high costs, lots of regulations to get through currently, manufacturing scale up, waste management's a problem, public acceptance, which there's a lot of people that don't support it. So it's not ready to go yet. I think the closest project might be ready to go around 2030. This was just recently published in Financial Times. Small modular nuclear reactors, and you can see most expensive way to generate electricity. Conventional nuclear is right behind it. Utility scale solar, combined solar and batteries, onshore wind, they're all lower prices than nuclear. And as a reminder, in Illinois, we deregulated the supply side of electricity. So Commonwealth Edison in our area is the utility that distributes the power, but you can select your supplier, your generator, and they have to compete. So are you going to go for nuclear that's going to be a much higher cost than solar, or are you going to go for solar when you look for a supplier? It's not competitive. And that's why they keep coming back for bailouts. So, as I mentioned, bailouts. Future Energy Jobs Act, which was passed in 2016, there's a $2.4 billion bailout over 10 years, and that was for Clinton and Quad Cities. So that was the first bailout we did. Ratepayers pay for that. And then the Climate Equitable Jobs Act, passed in 2021, was almost $700 million over 5 years. Byron and Dresden were the two plants that received some funding on that. And Byron, they had threatened, now at the time that was Exelon, now it's Constellation, but they had threatened to shut down Byron, and it was within days of their threatened date when the CEJA was passed. But we're not the only state that's been subsidizing or bailing out nuclear. Multiple states have, at least four or five or more have done that. Of course, there was a big scandal in Ohio about that bailout. I think maybe some people have been prosecuted over that. I'm not sure, but I think that's the case. And then, also all the nuclear is in the states have been getting older and they're not competing or they're not competitive. So a number have shut down. So these are a few, like Kewanee is near us. It's up by Two Rivers, in Wisconsin and Lake Michigan. San Onofre, we mentioned before, shut down. Fort Calhoun in Nebraska, that's a plant that when we had some large flooding was actually totally surrounded by floodwaters at one time, although I think they were able to prevent the plant from getting flooded. But there's others that have shut down as well. Palisades, Michigan, is another one that is shut down. But Holtec was the contractor that was supposed to do the decommissioning. They decided they wanted to reopen the plant instead. They got federal loan guarantees of $1.5 billion, and Michigan threw in a few $100 million. They're trying to reopen the plant. It was the thing about reopening these, they were not intended to be reopened. So when they did the shutdown, that was for a future decommissioning. And I think there's a lot of issues about trying to reopen an old plant. I know there's a number of people that are concerned about um, the tubes in the steam generators. What they do, they tend to plug them if they have bad tubes, and those do have plugged tubes. And there's more, so there's a lot of concern about how well that will hold up. Um, at any rate, that's probably the closest one to reopening. This is Lazard's a recognized source for energy costs. You can see solar is the yellow line. You can see the large drop in pricing on solar. The blue line is onshore wind. You can see that's dropped, not as significantly, but it has. And then the red line is nuclear, which is going up. So as you can see, the renewable power is substantially under the price of um, a nuclear. And then this, I think, is quite interesting. It shows on the bottom is cumulative installed capacity, and then it shows price per megawatt hour of electricity on the left. And this is from 2010 to 2019. So right in the middle, you can see that red line with the huge drop. That's solar. You can see how far down that has dropped. And at each doubling of capacity, the price dropped by 36%. Offshore wind is more expensive than onshore, but you can see that there has been a price drop on that. We don't have much, if any, in the United States, but there certainly in other countries have it offshore. And then you can see onshore wind at the bottom of the chart. It's gone from 86 down to 53. So that's also had a declining price. And as turbines have gotten better, they're actually rebuilding some of the wind farms. With higher capacity turbines, the more efficient turbines, they're higher. So the technology is improving. There'll be a better, more efficient, larger capacity. And then you'll see nuclear here is not much more capacity went in those 9 years, but prices have gone up significantly. And coal, of course, has the most installed capacity, and that's been relatively the same price from 2010 to 2019. This is just one chart on battery costs showing how that's been dropping as more and more batteries are being installed. Um, this is shows how much batteries are going in. They're now getting significant growth over 2018 to 2021. It was 52% annual growth in grid scale battery storage. In the last 3 years, 115% annual growth. The solid line is the additions, and then the circles are the cumulative amount of batteries. And then the left chart is gigawatts, and the other one's gigawatt hours. So if Surge, which we're trying to get past, part of the Surge is to add 6 gigawatts of um, capacity to Illinois. We need much more battery power to go along with renewable power that's being installed. So 6 gigawatts is roughly 6 Zion nuclear reactors. So I think one thing that gets overlooked, I mean, we do talk about we talk about, of course, the used nuclear fuel and that there's no storage for that. But realistically, every single bit of the cycle in nuclear has problems with radiation. So this photo on the right is one I took. We were at a nuclear conference in New Mexico. That's one of the mining sites. New Mexico has numerous nuclear mining sites. The much of the land is in indigenous areas, and they are faced with land that's contaminated as well as water. They have lots of health issues because uranium mining and milling contaminates land and water. And New Mexico especially has a lot of problems with that. But even just enriching the fuel to a level that it can be used, that generates byproducts. And the other thing about the fuel that we didn't really get into, but Russia is a major supplier of nuclear fuel, and that's not exactly someone we want to rely on to fuel our nuclear plants. But then the plant operation itself generates all kinds of radioactive waste. I'll get into that a little bit more when I get back to Zion. Um, but aside from the spent nuclear fuel, there's also contamination of the structures, equipment, and then the thermal pollution. As mentioned, these generate mass amounts of heat. There are times in very warm weather conditions where nuclear plants have had to throttle back because they could boil rivers or things like that. France has had that problem multiple times where they've had to cut way back when they need the most power because they're just generating too much heat. And then, as mentioned, waste storage and decommissioning, we have no solution for that. So every stage needs specialized containment and regulatory oversight for radioactive materials. There is not one stage that's free from risk of long-lived hazardous radioactive emissions. As I mentioned, there's no approved site for a U.S. permanent repository. There's currently no site. The closest one was Yucca Mountain. That was decided politically and not through good engineering. It really wasn't a good site, but there was both political and legal opposition, and that was dropped during the Obama administration. There's currently no efforts that I'm aware of to establish a permanent repository in the United States. So we're generating all this nuclear waste and nowhere to put it. Um, the only the only site in the world that's about ready to go is in Finland, and that was already supposed to be open. Right now, it's not quite ready. May open this year or possibly next year. But that's the only one. So all these countries that are using nuclear power have no place to send their waste. So one of the solutions that was suggested, which personally I think violates some of our laws, was to put in consolidated interim storage facilities. So in other words, we move the fuel from sites like Zion to there were two places that wanted to do it, one in New Mexico, one in Texas. So we would send our dry cast there. It would sit out there, and for who knows how long, until they find a permanent storage site, which, we're nowhere close to having that. So they potentially could have had a lot of these dry casts sitting there for many decades or centuries. There was massive opposition both in New Mexico and Texas. Both Republican and Democratic elected officials were opposed. And it There were lawsuits over it, and much opposition. So, but that was the proposal of what to do with this nuclear fuel, which is at best a temporary solution. Illinois is the largest nuclear state, has 11,000 metric tons of spent nuclear fuel currently. That's the most anywhere. And nationwide, there's about 90,000 metric tons. And we're generating more every year. And as I said, no place to put it. Oops. Okay. So what happened, I think about a week ago? Holtec abandoned their plans for the storage facility in New Mexico. Um, and I was rather stunned to see when I was looking at this, the initial application was for 500 dry casts. Zion has 65. And they plan to expand up to 10,000 dry casts of spent nuclear radioactive waste. But they just canceled their plans due to overwhelming opposition. So, in terms of waste, let's look at what occurred in Zion. Um, as I mentioned, the decommissioning took about 13 years. There were They thought they were done right about the time COVID hit, and it was delayed. NRC found several hotspots. They had to go through a whole process on resolving that issue with radioactive hotspots. And finally, that was done. NRC approved, and the license was then transferred from Energy Solutions back to Constellation in 2023. It cost almost $900 million. Energy Solutions, and they created a subsidiary called Zion Solutions, um, agreed to do it. They wanted to get in on the ground floor because of activity of closed nuclear plants, and wanted to make sure that they would be one of the major companies involved in decommissioning. So they agreed to do it for the cost of what was in the decommissioning fund in Zion. And they, of course, they owned the site in Clive. So if they had to, they could probably discount what they charge for that. But they basically used the entire decommissioning fund. We never did get a final accounting of what the total cost was, but it was somewhere in the vicinity of $900 million. So nuclear waste is divided into classes, Class A, Class B, Class C, greater than Class C, and then SNF is spent nuclear fuel. So what they did was ship Class A waste to Clive. So Class A is like has less radioactivity. It's less dense. It's not it's waste that's not as nowhere near as bad as the higher levels. So they shipped over 3 million pounds of nuclear waste, though it is radioactive, to Clive, Utah. And on the right is a picture of the cars that were used. They had tops on them to make sure that nothing fell out while they were being transported. And they literally shipped 2 train loads uh, a week for months. I'm not sure how many months, but it took months to get all that shipped out to Clive, Utah. Then the Class B and Class C waste, which is more radioactive, tends to be a lot of like valves and pumps and things like that. That went to Andrews, Texas. Andrews, Texas was also is the site proposed um, for the consolidated interim storage site. But they do have a facility that takes Class B and Class C waste. So that went to Andrews, Texas. And then everything greater than Class C and spent nuclear fuel stays in Zion. As I mentioned, no place to send it. So 61 of the dry casts were spent nuclear fuel, and 4 were greater than Class C, which I think were mostly reactor components, or maybe parts of the steam generators. I'm not sure exactly what, but there were 4 that went in into dry cast storage. So that's just some of the waste that's generated by running a nuclear plant. There's just a lot of waste to deal with. This is what the dry casts look like in Zion. Um, they're almost 19 feet high, weigh 157 tons when they're loaded. It's just got a steel liner that's 1 3/4 inches thick, and then the concrete. Um, there are several other styles, but this is what Zion has. There's some that are stored horizontally into like a building, and then Holtec uses one where they're more recessed. So all you see is like a vent at the top, and the rest is recessed below the land level. Now, the thing about these, they're only licensed for 20 years, and then I think they'll relicense for 40 years after that. Um, I think we can expect that we'll have to have these for at least a couple hundred years. There's real, like I said, as it before, no solution. These are they're filled underwater. Well, then they get a vacuum. I think they fill it with an inert gas, and then they're welded shut, and then they're put into this concrete enclosure. On the left is what they looked like when they arrived in Zion. They didn't have the concrete shell. They poured the concrete there. On the right is the liners that went inside the dry cast. And then this is where they went. They call an independent spent fuel storage installation. Everyone calls it ISC. This is what it looks like. There's a big pad to put the dry cast, and then a building. This has to be guarded 24/7. And so that's what the building is for the security. This is what it looks like from a satellite photo. Um, so the dry casts are in the center near the bottom, and you can see the building there. Directly to the top of that or north of that is a switching yard. the grid is still there. The power lines come in, go out. So it is still part of the grid. And then on the right, you can see where the nuclear plant was and the two containment domes. When this satellite photo was taken, they hadn't been removed yet. They're now gone. And this is more of a close-up of what that site looks like for the dry cast storage. So you can see it's double wire or double fence enclosure, the building, and then the dry cast. And they have to be inspected. Security guys do that. And also Illinois Emergency, I forget their exact name, Illinois Emergency Services, they do have some monitors in the area that monitor for radiation in case there's any leaks. So, couple aside from 3 Mile Island, there's two in particular disasters that have just been huge. One was Fukushima, that was hit by a tsunami after an earthquake. That took out their external power and also the internal power, which meant that they had no way of cooling all the spent fuel that's very hot. So three of the reactors melted down. And you can see in the background what looks like a bunch of tanks, which they are. What they have to do is try to cool these buildings that were in part destroyed. They have to try to cool that fuel, collect it back, and put it in a tank that's very radioactive water. And so all those tanks were put there as they've had to, since 2011, keep pouring water into where the reactors were to keep it from starting to react again. Um, so this is one of the worst nuclear accidents. It's rated level 7 along with Chernobyl. Um, as I mentioned, it was in 2011. They've been trying to decommission since then. These particular reactors were the GE style, so the spent fuel was stored above the reactors, whereas like in Zion, there was a building in between the two containment domes, but these were stored above, so it was very difficult to remove spent fuel. I think most of that's been done. But the 888 tons that they estimate of fuel debris, extremely radioactive, are still inside the damaged reactors. They did recently manage to obtain two small samples of less than a total of 1 gram that they want to analyze to see exactly what it looks like. Major problems of even trying to get in there. Robotics would get destroyed because of the high radioactivity. They've had to do a lot of things in terms of shielding and protection. So they're nowhere near trying to do anything about this meltdown of fuel. And as mentioned in here, 2037 is when they hope to start on that and hope to finish by 2051. So one thing they've been doing is they do have a processing center to try to remove the worst radioactive components out of the water, but they have so much water that they've started discharges into the ocean. It's mostly tritium, which is radioactive water. It's almost impossible to separate that from regular water, and so they're discharging in the ocean. Um, Other places as well have wanted to do that. There's been several sites in the US where they have been trying to get permission to release radioactive water into oceans, bays, whatever. Um, so this entire decommissioning process has required unprecedented robotics, worker safety protocols, extremely dangerous for workers, and technical innovation, very high financial costs. I saw several widely varying numbers on estimated costs to try to clean this up. It's very large, but I didn't put a number out there because there seemed to be too much variance. And then there's still an exclusion zone. Everyone's not been able to return. They've also had to um, a lot of the land was contaminated, so they've had to dig up the land and collect that, and it's really quite a mess. So some residents are not able to return yet to where they were. The other worst disaster was Chernobyl, also rated level 7. That occurred in 1986. And as I recall, I don't think Russia told anyone. I think several countries were picking up an increase in radioactivity in the atmosphere, and that's when they discovered that this incident had occurred. So they did put some sort of a sarcophagus around Chernobyl a long time ago. That was failing. Um, and so they built this dome that we'll get into in a minute. But estimated total cost $700 billion over 30 years to fix. There's still an exclusion zone around the reactors with restricted access because it's contaminated. Um, and the other thing is Chernobyl, and then there's another plant, Zaporizhzhia. They're located in active war zones due to Russia's invasion. So we have two nuclear plants that are at high risk because of war. And Zaporizhzhia currently has no external power. They've had no external power for about a month. They have to cool the spent fuel and the reactors, and are, I believe currently doing that with diesel, but their power was disconnected. So that's an active risk right now. So that's going on. So that's just another risk. And looking at the new methods of warfare, it's no one is safe. I mean, you can send in drones long distances, and so we're really not prepared for that kind of risk. Also, during the occupation, Russia had soldiers at Chernobyl, and they were in this exclusion zone. They were exposed to radioactive dust and dirt, and there's been numerous reports of radiation sickness and contamination because they were in a radioactive site. The Chernobyl site is still highly radioactive. It's still difficult to manage the spent fuel, contaminated materials, structural integrity. So what they did is they built this huge confinement structure because the old sarcophagus was failing, and it was built in two sections and then pushed together on rail. Um, that was done, started in 2010. It was finished in 2016. Cost about $2 billion US, and it weighs about 36,000 tons. It's a huge structure that's supposed to last about 100 years. You can see the dimensions there. So that green circle is a spot where a Russian drone hit it, I assume with a missile, created a hole in both the outer and inner layers, which has created more radioactive risk. This is just one of these risks. Is another reason why nuclear just is not a good, it's just not a good way to go. So let's kind of sum some of this up. Um, New plants have the very high construction costs and take excessive amounts of time to build. Nothing has changed there. It's been that way for decades. It's why they haven't been building a lot of nuclear plants. Installation of renewable power and battery storage is increasing rapidly, and costs are dropping every year. Currently, no permanent place to store spent nuclear fuel in the United States. So that's a big risk. We have this all over the place, and small modular nuclear reactors will add even more sites if that ever gets going. There are still major safety concerns. Major accidents have occurred, minor accidents have occurred. Many things can occur, and cleanup is expensive and difficult to do, and also can potentially impact the health of people living in those areas. Um, and as I mentioned, there's still issues about release of radioactive water. A lot of plants generate tritium. It occurs sometimes as part of the process, and so some plants are contaminated with radioactive water. Zion, as far as I could tell, was relatively had few problems with that. But there are, as I mentioned, the discharges in Fukushima. There's additional releases at U.S. plants. Holtec, I think it is trying to. They were refused permission to release it I think it was Chesapeake Bay, so they decided to try to evaporate it instead. But it's radioactive. So that's still one other problem. And then public bailouts and subsidies are increasingly required. Nuclear just is not economically viable and it requires financial support from governments and ratepayers. The Realistically, what's really happening? The global energy transition is moving away from nuclear power towards cheaper, faster, and safer renewable solutions. They will just keep getting better. The more that goes in, the better they get. The more batteries that are done, they'll get better as we go along. So we still have massive economic, environmental, and safety challenges for nuclear energy. That's why it just is not a good solution at all. And that's it. So, any questions?
Oh, wow. So, Linda and Steve, do you want to pose the questions? Some of them I think Doug already answered, but can you see the chat okay?
Yeah, I did not see the questions during chat.
Okay.
Um,
Um,
can you see them, Linda?
I can, Steve's having trouble seeing them too. Here's the first one. What did all the hot water from the Zion plant do to the Lake Michigan environment?
Well, that's a great question. It so Lake Michigan is of such a volume that it is a huge heat sink, but it never should have been allowed to begin with. They should have had to put in towers. I think if they tried to build a Zion there now, they'd have to put in cooling towers. They're just not allowed to put um, that amount of thermal energy into a body of water. But I do know on the positive side, it was a great fishing spot. Uh, but I'm not sure, that heat would have dissipated. But it's a lot of heat, and of course, they're not the only ones that were doing. Like Waukegan Coal Plant was dumping hot water into lake. I mean, I think Palisades was. I think Kewanee and there's another one up by Two Rivers. I think they were all dumping water. So there's a lot of energy sources of thermal energy going into Lake Michigan. That's just not the appropriate thing to do. So um, I I can't say specifically how bad it was for our area, but it's not the right policy.
There is another one from another lady here. Um, what will happen to the fuel rods being stored at Zion if sea levels continue to rise and the lake the water level continues to rise?
Well, yeah, that is a question. If the ocean goes up, is Lake Michigan going to go up? Now, generally, I think um, we're about 700 feet above sea level
Yeah,
in our area. So I don't know that Lake Michigan might necessarily rise, but it's a huge threat on ocean sites, and there are a number of nuclear plants on the ocean. And as mentioned, San Onofre, look up a satellite photo of that, and you'll see how close they are to the lake. I think Zion, we do get fluctuations in water level. Um, it's not right on Lake Michigan, but it's close. If the lake did go up substantially, we would have a bit of a problem. I, I don't think it's the worst threat compared to other locations, but I don't like having it that close to the lake. I mean, if anything happened to those to contaminate Lake Michigan, I mean, millions and millions of people use that for as a water source, drinking water. So I I don't like having it that close to Lake Michigan, but I also don't favor moving it and sticking this problem on someone else.
right.
One thing I didn't mention, like that site in New Mexico, That's an environmental justice issue. It's a low income, high minority populations in that area. I mean, this is what always happens. It's who has Zion and the Waukegan, we're minority towns with low income and we're the towns that get stuck with these things. And that's the same thing for that site in New Mexico. And that's one reason why it's had so much opposition.
There was one more question. Steve, do you want to just tell us what your question is? 'Cause
Yeah,
we
I
can
have
see-
two. How does the water actually get heated? Are those rods hot from the radioactivity? How does it actually heat the water?
Yeah, it's from the fission process. So basically, you have the nuclear fuel. It's fissioning, and so that creates heat.
Okay,
And
right,
you're actually creating different substances. So like one thing you wind up with is plutonium. That's
right,
one. There's multiple substances, but you're basically bombarding atoms with I think neutrons primarily, but you're bombarding them with other and that starts a chain reaction, which generates heat. Of course, like a nuclear bomb is, a very rapid nuclear
right,
reaction.
right.
This is more
Okay, the other
controlled.
question,
Yes.
my other question is, it looks like in your charts that all those power plants you mentioned and had listed, they all went over. They all went
Yes.
over budget. Do they
Well,
always
the
go over
chart
budget?
the chart I was showing was over time. They were all over time. So yeah, it wasn't dollars. So the
Oh,
chart,
okay,
the chart
okay,
that had the blue and the orange, that
okay.
was
All
time.
right, all right.
Blue was estimated, the time it was supposed to take, and orange was the extra time. And
Got
you
it.
can see like a lot of times orange was way larger than blue. But the one slide I showed that showed how much over budget these were, substantially, double,
Okay.
triple, often.
But
So
even whether it's budget or time, they're all going over. Don't
yes.
they estimate it correctly in the first place?
Well, a lot of things happen. These are very, very complex places. I mean, the chart, what I showed for the process looks really simple, but when you go into a plant, it is unbelievably complicated. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. I think, like in Zion, they had to constantly make changes. That's why my father-in-law was working there after the construction was done. They were adding new sensors or changing this or changing that, and they constantly had to do upgrades and changes to the plant. So I'm sorry, I lost track of the question, but they're very complex, involved facilities, very
Okay.
complex.
All right. Thank you.
And then Steve, I think that's Steve Carlson, isn't it, Steve? It's Rosemary.
Hi,
Uh,
I do believe we've come to the end of our questions.
I think he
Mr.
had one
Ower.
more question there,
Oh,
Linda.
one more. Okay, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
he's asked, but I think he missed it because Doug talked about it at the beginning quite a bit.
We're generating
Was-
way, way, way more power with new renewable is far exceeding what can be done with nuclear. So like, as I mentioned, 545 gigawatts of new renewable power last year across the globe, and 5 gigawatts of nuclear. Nuclear cannot keep up with that. It's not possible.
So he's
I mean,
asking, could we have done that decades earlier?
nuclear
No, gone
or
to
renewable?
renewables. Yeah.
Well, some of it has been going in for quite some time, but originally coal was relatively cheap, and but renewable power is rapidly advancing, and the technology, and that's one of the interesting things about that report I was mentioning. The technology is really, it's a game changer. It's like a whole new paradigm, basically, of what's occurring with just like your computers, like every time you buy a new cell phone, you got like twice as much memory as before. It's the same thing with solar cells. They can keep improving efficiency and the amount of output out of a solar cell. And so the more you build, the better they get. They put more and more into it and constantly improve. And you just can't do that with nuclear. It's just not possible. And you can never build them that fast. 545 Zion reactors a year, not possible. No way. Couldn't be done.
Well, I do believe that comes to the end of our questions, and I have to make an editorial comment. I think with global climate change, we have no choice. We have to go to renewable sources. It's not going to get better if we don't do something.
True. And like I mentioned, batteries are a key component to that, and that is rapidly changing on batteries. And we need to get SERGA passed. That's up for our legislature now. And that will help get more battery power into Illinois.
Well, I want to thank Doug for your excellent presentation, and Rosemary and Steve for backing up this program. And I want to thank everybody who's here for joining us and who will be watching us in the future. We are looking forward to our next program on November 16th for our Sunday Speaker Series. We will be having a special guest for this final presentation. We'll welcome Liza Lehrer, an Assistant Director of the Urban Wildlife Institute of the Lincoln Park Zoo. She will share the results of a community engagement program which studies bats in their local, in our world. They have a citizen scientist program which where they use iPads with antenna on them, and they walk through neighborhoods, schoolyards, under the bridges, in the cemeteries, and they collect data of the bats' echolocation. They these incredible little flying mammals can then be identified down to the species level. So they know what's going on and where the bats are. And in case you didn't know, I'll give you one of the answers to the quiz. Bats eat their weight in insects every day. So they're not something we want to see pass through. You can register for this program on our website or through the newsletter, and you'll get the information of how to sign on to that last Sunday Speaker Series in November. And I want to thank you again, Doug, especially for sharing this incredible information, and Rosemary for coming to our assistance, and Steve. And for those of you who are still online, we'll be sending out an address probably later this week where you can return to Doug's program and watch it at your leisure. I'm sure some of us want to go back and take a look at some of those, that multitude of information. Thank you very much for coming and staying with us, and good night to all. Good night.